Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you.
Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 89. I've got Murray Sabrin, who has been a professor of finance at Ramapo College in New Jersey for a long time. He's retired. He's also written 6 books. And we're just going to talk about the changes he's seen in academia in his long career. How are you doing, Murray?
I'm doing great, Chris. Hope things are all well in Texas.
Yeah, they're going well down here. I hope it's nice up in New Jersey. It's probably a little cooler.
Well, no, we're in Florida now. We left New Jersey 2 years ago.
Okay, yeah. Well, Florida can. Well, yeah. I hope you're safe then.
Yeah. Well, we were in the middle of the storm a year ago. We were in Fort Myers. Now we're in Naples, and this storm passed us by. We got some wind and rain on, I guess it was Tuesday, and then yesterday it was very windy. But the brunt of the storm was in the Tampa, Clearwater area, and they really got hammered. Not as bad as I think they thought. Everyone's giving Governor DeSantis some kudos for his leadership in putting together all the resources needed to get the people back to a much better place than they were after the storm.
Yeah, that's what I've heard about DeSantis. I mean, if a bridge is out, he gets, obviously he doesn't do the work, but the bridge gets back up. It's I've heard he's a very good hurricane governor. Of course, not every governor gets those opportunities, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, Murray, how did you get started in finance and political free markets and stuff like that?
Well, I write about it extensively in my memoir, which came out last year, From Immigrant to Public Intellectual and American Story. And basically, it's because I was a history major as an undergraduate in the 1960s. And this was at the height of the Vietnam War. I graduated in 1968, which is when we had 500,000 troops in Vietnam. It was an awful year with the 2 political assassinations, Martin Luther King in April, and then Bobby Kennedy in June. And I got married in August of 1968. So we just celebrated our 55th wedding anniversary. And it was just one of the most chaotic years in American history. And I was trying to understand what was going on here. We knew the war was a total disaster. I realized by the late 60s, after reading Ayn Rand's Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal in 1969, that the government is really interfering in the economy, spending money that it doesn't have, giving us these deficits. And I realized as a recent college graduate that the welfare warfare state, which is the term I heard of for many years, is the problem we're facing in America. And unfortunately, and Chris, we know this better than anyone else, is that both Republicans and the Democrats have embraced the welfare warfare state, despite the rhetoric of the Republicans. And of course, the Democrats used to be the party of anti-war and civil liberties. Now they've gone full-blown statist. They believe in the welfare state. They believe in reducing people's civil liberties. And of course, they support this endless proxy war in the Ukraine. So how I got involved is reading Ayn Rand's book in 1969. I was reading Milton Friedman's column in Newsweek in the 1960s, and it made a lot of sense. As someone who was not well versed in economics as an undergraduate, I only took 2 economics undergraduate courses, and it made a lot of sense about government regulation and how it negatively impacts the economy. And then in the early 70s, I started reading some libertarian articles that were, of all places, the New York Times, of some of the luminaries in the libertarian movement. And one of them was Murray Rothbard, the father of the libertarian movement of the 1970s and 80s. And then I read a wonderful essay, an op-ed that he wrote in the New York Times on September 6, 1971, a very important event in my life. We were coming home from Italy, and on the plane, a passenger was reading the New York Times, and I saw the headline op-ed saying the president's economic betrayal. So I asked the passenger to read the article, and there was Murray Rothbard's incredibly critique discussion of Nixon's wage price controls and eliminating the last link between the dollar and gold. And so I read it, became very interested, didn't follow through with any of following his literature. And then in September 1972, I went to Rutgers as a full-time doctoral student to get a PhD so I could teach at the college level. I had began my career in 1968 as a New York City school teacher, realized that after a couple of years, this was not going to be my future because there was no intellectual stimulation teaching at the intermediate level. And I decided to get a PhD in geography because I was fascinated with geography, history. And I said, let me get a PhD in geography and teach geography. And so I enrolled in Rutgers in 1972 and came across Rothbard's For a New Liberty in 1973, 74. And that was the whole libertarian manifesto of how to get from here to there, from the welfare warfare state to a limited government republic with a non-interventionist foreign policy. And I wrote him a letter. He was living in New York City. I was living in New York City also, and I didn't hear from him. And so one April of 1974, I drove to Polytech Institute in Brooklyn where he was teaching, and I met him, and I sat in on his class, and he was thrilled that someone was embracing the Austrian economics perspective from a geographical discipline. And I got an invitation to attend the first Austrian economics conference in South Royalton, Vermont in June of 1974. And next year is the 50th anniversary of that historic event. For me, it was very transformative because I met all these young economists that were studying at the PhD level, some recent PhDs in economics. And the speakers from Rothbard to other Austrian economists, Professor Kerzner from NYU. And I just immersed myself in reading all about the Austrian economics literature and libertarian literature. And they dovetailed beautifully because Mises' magnum opus, Human Action, really summarizes everything we know about human beings. People engage in action to achieve their goals. That's a self-evident proposition. If people have goals, they have to do something. If you want to get a college degree, you have to go to college. If you want to open up a business, you got to learn about different aspects of opening a business. We want to achieve our goals as soon as possible. So these are universal truth. And what the Austrian economists did in Mises' Human Action and Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State is weave how, from that simple proposition, people have to be purposeful in their life in order to achieve their goals. And in the 900 pages in each book, you learn about how the economy works, and then you learn about how government intervention upsets the natural processes of supply and demand and other aspects of economics. And that's why we have this horrible situation today of humongous debt, $32 trillion, endless budget deficits, money printing constantly, manipulation of interest rates, economic intervention into every aspect of our lives, whether it's healthcare, education, housing, transportation. And we now have endless wars. We haven't had a declaration of war since December 8th, a day after Pearl Harbor in 1941, yet we've been involved in war after war after war, Korea, Vietnam, what have you. And here we are in 2023, and we still haven't been able to embrace the libertarian message, which I think is a universal message of peace and freedom and civil liberties and prosperity based upon sound economics. Instead, we have to deal with this welfare warfare state. But the point I keep on making, Chris, and this I think is a key point that I think a lot of people miss, despite everything the government has thrown at the economy, men and women entrepreneurs, not only in the United States, but around the world, are still able to produce as long as we don't have that Atlas Shrugged phenomenon that Ayn Rand talks about in her book, Atlas Shrugged, where people get so fed up with the bureaucrats and the endless wars and the civil liberties that they withdraw from production. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But the point is, her book was basically a warning to the American people, don't let the bureaucrats control our lives. And unfortunately, there are too many people that are complying with the bureaucrats. And we saw this during COVID. I mean, this was a perfect example of how people just blindly followed what Fauci and others were saying about COVID, and the doctors just dropped the ball, but not by not asking serious questions about COVID, the vaccine, the adverse consequences, and so on and so forth. And so that's why I've written 2 books on healthcare, written a book about the business cycle, the Federal Reserve, and my memoir to point out that my journey from the 1950s to the present uh, is something that I wish people would look at and to say, hey, I was a liberal Democrat in the 1960s. I supported all the the Great Society programs, thinking that that was going to be the best way. And then as things didn't turn out well, I said, why aren't the things that the government is promising working out well? And that's when you start reflecting about government policy. And that's what turned me into a libertarian by the early 1970s.
You know, you'd read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which was certainly an eye-opener for me. Did you read Ayn Rand's book, The New Left?
I don't recall that book. I've read just about everything she wrote in the late 60s, early 70s. I think, and I subscribed to her magazine, The Objectivist, and that had some very interesting articles about past events.
Yeah.
And she had a blind spot, I think, not realizing that some big business people are part of the problem. They're not the solution. And I think she had a blind spot for that because she didn't realize that even though the literature was there when she was writing, that in American history, a lot of big businesses colluded with the government to get what they wanted, which is what? Economic fascism.
Oh, yes. But, you know, she also analyzed the hippies and how it was, very much a mystical movement and very anti-reason. I mean, I think in a lot of ways she kind of predicted where it was going right now, though I don't think she could have predicted it would be as bad. And of course, you know, talking about 1968, there was also the breakup with Nathaniel Branden was in 1968.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if because Rand was in New York too the whole time. I don't know if you ever got to cross paths with any of those people or not, but.
Yeah, I met her in June of 1972, and George Reisman, an economist who was part of that inner circle, gave a talk in New York City, and she was there with her husband. And I just went over to say hello, saying how I admire her work. And I was going to graduate school full time in September, and that was the only time I met her. But her writings were inspirational because not only from a literature perspective, but also from just the collection of essays in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, were just wonderful insights, especially Greenspan's article, Gold and Economic Freedom. And it's ironic, he becomes chairman of the Fed, and what does he do? He keeps on inflating and gives us the dot-com bubble and the housing bubble.
Yeah, never did anything to implement those ideas anyway. But so Murray, you know, you've been been teaching in colleges for a long time. What can what has happened to academia? It seems like to me this was something that's been going on for a long time, but and it was called out by people like Martin Anderson and Thomas Sowell 30 years ago. But
yeah,
what's happened, and because some people thought the rebellion of the 60s would just pass, and really it never has passed.
Well, I think what happened is I graduated from Hunter College in the Bronx in 1968, which then became Lehman College. There were 2 Hunter College campuses, one in Manhattan, the original, and the one in the Bronx. And I attended the one in the Bronx, and it split off as a separate college within the city university system. And remember, the civil rights movement of the 1960s had good intentions, but I think the means, as I realized later, were faulty, and using state coercion to quote integrate society. And again, the right of association to me is a very important concept, and I think it would have happened naturally if the federal government hadn't been involved. And so, because of the pressure of the civil rights movement, the city university system announced it was going to have an open enrollment in the colleges. In other words, just about anybody could go to college as long as they passed some certain minimum standards, and that was supposed to be implemented by 1975. What happened was, because of the pressure of the civil rights movement, it was up to, I think, 1969, 1970. And I met with one of my history professors right after I graduated in 1968, because I went to Lehman College for my master's degree from 1968 to 71. And she was really critical of the open admissions policy because it meant a lot of students were unprepared to go to college. That's why we have community colleges, that if students do not have the standards to get into a 4-year college, you can go to a community college where they may have some remedial work for you to do to get up to standards to get into a four-year college. And that was, I think, the process for many, many decades with these community colleges. But open enrollment, this push for equality, egalitarianism, made four-year colleges pretty problematic in terms of who they were admitting. I'll give you a perfect example. I started teaching at Ramapo College in 1985 on an emergency hire, which turned into eventually a tenure track position. But when I got to the college, I found out there was a division of basic studies. So I asked my colleagues and the dean, what's this all about? What's this division of basic studies? And they said, well, it's really to help students improve their reading and writing skills and arithmetic skills. So I said, why should it be in the college? Why shouldn't it be in the high schools and in the community colleges? So from that time on, I realized that this whole virus, if you will, of making college available to everybody was diluting the value of a college education and making students and having students in college who were less prepared than they otherwise would be. And that was a real problem, because what that meant was that you had to really tweak your curriculum, your syllabus, in order to make sure that students understood what you were doing. And so when I started teaching at Ramapo in 85, there were some students who I felt should not be at the college, in college, because they just didn't have the good writing skills or mathematical skills. And I was teaching macroeconomics, microeconomics, and corporate finance. And so I realized that there's a problem, because there were students who really should have either gone into the workplace after high school or gone to a community college or just taken some remedial courses to get into college. But as time went on, I think that process, I saw teaching freshmen. I taught very few freshmen because I was teaching basically junior and senior level courses. But when I did teach freshmen, there were a handful of students, again, that I noticed that should not be at the college level. And most of them should be there. So that's one aspect of what's happened at the college level. Again, I can't speak for what's happening right now, but I just heard recently that one of my colleagues who taught economics decided to retire because she felt that the students were not as serious as they were in the past. And she began her career just a year or two or three after I began teaching in the 1980s. So she saw an evolution of students who were not as serious as students we saw back in the 80s and 90s. And the other thing I saw was students were more engaged in the classroom back then. They were more interested in what was being taught in the classroom and asking more questions. And so I think there's been this devaluation of a college degree, because a college degree today is not as valuable as it was back in the 60s and 70s and even earlier, because most jobs, you just needed a college degree. You didn't need a master's or a PhD or any sort of higher level of education, because the Wall Street Journal, I think 30 years ago, this is incredible, Chris, they had an article about what the entrance exit exam was for high schools back in the 1890s, and it was probably more challenging than a college degree today. So back then, in the 19th and early 20th century, high school for most people was a terminal degree, because they learned so much in high school, because you didn't have all these touchy-feely subjects like you have today, and people can go out in the workplace and get a decent paying job in whatever field they wanted. Probably not maybe in engineering or something like that, where you need very specialized training, or medicine, but a lot of jobs, you just needed a high school education. And so what we've done is this educational, industrial, governmental complex, which we know costs a fortune at the college level, at the school level, because schools have, I think, lost their way in terms of their mission. Again, a product of New York City schools of the 1950s and 60s, it was all about learning. It wasn't about gender identity or other things that have nothing to do with education. It has to do with cultural issues. And this is a very troubling phenomenon, especially if you're a parent with young kids and you're trying to figure out what's the best for your kids today. But at the college level, I just got an email from the college today, because I'm on their daily digest email list. And again, we have an office, which all colleges do, of DIE, diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I don't know what that means because I've been on so many search committees at the college, and we always pick the best person for the job, no matter what their ethnic background, their sexual orientation was, and who cared about that. Can you do the job? That should be the criteria for hiring, not all this other stuff, which is basically checking boxes on somebody's ethnic scorecard or gender scorecard. And this is what happened to America. We've gone from meritocracy to cultural identity or political identity, sexual identity, which is going to, I think, have a huge impact on the workplace.
Yeah, by the way, Murray, just asking if you remember, what did you pay to go to undergrad back then?
Here's the most phenomenal thing. As an undergraduate, tuition was free. All you had to pay for were books and some minor fees. It was basically free.
That was where?
That was at the City University throughout the whole New York City system. Then,
of course, okay, like that was like City College, NYU, stuff like that?
No, City College, Hunter College, Brooklyn College,
okay,
Queens College, and then, of course, Lehman College. And then, of course, tuition went up as inflation kicked in the late 60s, early 70s. I'll give you another example. When I started Rutgers in 1972, tuition was $35 a credit. So that was 50 years ago, and tuition was very inexpensive, to say the least. And because of inflation, this is what inflation does. This is what money printing does. It drives up the cost of basic services, especially education and healthcare. And if you look at those two components of the consumer price index for the last 40 years, they have been the fastest increase in prices. Why? Because of government involvement, Medicare, Medicaid, and student loan subsidies. And this is why the insight of the Austrian economists and other free market economists, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. And the politicians will never learn. They just will never learn, Chris. And that's the sad reality of where we are, not only in the United States, but around the world. And there's a great letter in the Wall Street Journal today about Henry Ford. He didn't need the government subsidizing the production of cars or the purchase of cars or subsidizing gas stations. It was all done through the free market. And yet with electric vehicles, the government is subsidizing it and distorting the automobile market. And this is why you have government waste is a big part of what government does, because it's not allowing the market to determine what goods should be produced, and a lot of things that shove down consumers' throats.
Well, and like healthcare and the colleges, you also have this growing class of people who do nothing but really push papers and go to meetings.
Yep.
Like the DEI people, or or like people who work in medical coding or stuff like that. I mean, there aren't that many people who do the actual work. I mean, obviously, there's always been a research component in a lot of colleges too, though. They're not just teaching, they're doing things like research, and in many cases valuable research. But then you've got this other administrative class, or this office building, and that's all these people do is they spend time in the office. It's really that's really the whole transformation of our economy. We don't produce anything. We hardly produce anything in America but food. And yet we have all these people who just push papers and go to meetings.
Yeah. Well, this is why government spending is such a problematic issue. I mean, we're spending nearly $7 trillion a year. And this is after the COVID stimulus is over. Biden has just ratcheted up government spending, which just demonstrates that Robert Hicks' thesis in that great book, Crisis of Leviathan, Critical Episodes in the Growth of Government. Every time you have a crisis, government spending increases but never recedes, and neither do the regulations. And we're on the verge of getting another mandate, vaccines and lockdowns and masks and all that because of a new variant. And this is another example of government intrusion in the economy. The fear factor, the propaganda that government has at its disposal with its allies in the mainstream media. They just create so much fear that people think they're going to die if they get sick. And this just shows you how ignorant people are about health and medicine, and they don't ask serious questions to their doctors and their politicians about what's going on. And as someone who's been involved in, or interested in health issues since we got married, I do the best I can to stay out of the doctor's office in the hospital, because that's what I want. Because in the last years of my parents' life, their kitchen, one of their kitchen cabinets was just full of medicine, and I didn't know what the interactions were because they were both cancer survivors, and they had other issues as well. But the point is, we don't need so much medicine that people are taking. In fact, there was an article in the New York Post yesterday, Chris, which I sent to my friend, who's a longtime friend, who's a naturopath. Doctors are realizing that people are not getting enough fruits and vegetables, and therefore having chronic health issues. Well, guess what? We were told back as a youngster, eat your fruits and vegetables. Now doctors are realizing you have to eat your fruits and vegetables to avoid chronic conditions. And this shows you where medicine is today, where the doctors are behind the curve, because most of them, again, I don't have data in front of me, but I think most of them just prescribe pills because that's what they were trained in medical school. If you see somebody with symptoms, you prescribe medication as opposed to looking at the underlying factors which cause the symptoms. And that's the problem with the American medicine today.
Yeah. I didn't want to go down the healthcare rabbit hole too, but the other thing too, Murray, though, you've pointed out, declining standards. When you retired, do you think you saw, though, a difference also in the students coming in? Because it seems like America on a cultural level has really worked hard to extend childhood. I mean, my grandfather as a first grader walked to school 2 miles one way, and you don't have kids doing things like that, or it's very rare if they do stuff like that anymore. So they're coming in and they've had less experience with the world now. And you're suddenly, it's very much a culture shock when you leave home like that.
Well, the other difference between the 80s and 90s and today is back then there were no smartphones and no laptops in the classroom. Students had to take notes. They don't do that anymore. They're on their smartphone, they're on their laptop during class. And that's a little bit disconcerting. So what I try to do is to engage them as much as possible in the classroom, rather than just giving straight lectures. And one of my favorite courses to teach, if not the favorite course, was the Financial History of the United States, which I taught, I think, the last 10 years of my career. And there, students had to read and they had to write, and we discussed the issues, looking at American history through the lens of finance. And students loved the course because not only did they learn more about American history than they probably did in their history course, but they learned how finance and history were intertwined and how the economy evolved since the beginning of the Republic, even before the Republic, through the colonial period. And they just got this broad panorama of 200 plus years of American financial history. And many of them told me that what they learned is going to be extremely helpful, not only their own personal life, but their professional life as well, because they got insights about how the economy works during the course of a business cycle. And I left just as COVID was unfolding. I left in July of 20, and I had to teach my last semester online for the first time in my 35-year career. I never taught online, and I had to teach 3 courses for the second half of the semester because, remember, we locked down in the middle of March of 2020, and we had to scramble to learn how to teach online. I never did it before, and I held classes every day that I was supposed to, and most of the students showed up, some of them didn't. But the problem with online teaching is that if students don't put on their video cam, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if they're there. And so it was a little bit of a challenge, but I think most students were there. And I went through all the material, and the dean let the faculty know, since it was my last semester, that Murray could have called it in and said, students, you're on your own for the last 7 weeks. Instead, I did what was the professional thing to do, which is to teach the students, which was my responsibility for the second half of the semester. And I think I did it relatively well because no one complained about it. But it was a challenge. I mean, to never do something and then have to do 3 classes in a short order. But it took a lot of work, but I got through it, and I think the students appreciated it.
Yeah. Do you think this might burst the bubble, the whole coronavirus thing? That we'll now see a decline in students going or not
Going to college or
yeah.
going to college in general.
You think it might cause an exodus from the colleges? Yeah.
Yeah, because the colleges starting to mandate masks and the new shot, which is untested, which is really incredible when you think about it. So I think a lot of students are realizing that they're not getting their money's worth, and that's what it comes down to. What value are you getting for what you're paying? And I think that's the essence. Not I think, I know that's the essence of the economy. Are you getting value? Subjective value, which is a primary principle of Austrian economics, that we, the consumer, determine what the value is of a product or a service, not the producer. And so if students are paying it in some of these Ivy League colleges, 60, 70,000 a year, taking out loans, is that really worth it? And I think most parents are coming to the realization that they're better off their children going to a state college, which is half the price or less. And if they can get some scholarships, that's wonderful, because college is really about self-actualization. By that, I mean, if you're really interested in the subject matter, you're going to go to class and then learn as much as you can on your own, because if you're not a curious individual, no matter how much how much classroom time you have, you're not going to succeed. You have to be curious about the world around you. And that's what I was when I was a youngster. And one of my wonderful bar mitzvah gifts in 1959 was an atlas of the United States. And I studied that thoroughly, learning about where the countries are, trying to get as much information. And I was a geography minor, so I was fascinated with geography, studied every region of the world. At one time, Chris, I could tell you everything about every country around the world, because taking a course in South America, Europe, Soviet Union, Asia, you get to learn about different people's cultures, the topography, the economy. And it was really a multidisciplinary subject. And then we traveled a lot. We traveled all over the world. And because of COVID, we haven't traveled since COVID kicked in. But we've traveled. There are a lot of places we haven't gone to, like Japan and Africa. And we've gone to Antarctica. We've gone to South America, not as much as I'd like to. We've gone to Indonesia, China. So we've seen a lot of places that you just see on TV and National Geographic or read about, but experiencing the culture of these places on tour is really we went to Cuba, another fascinating place that Americans should go to, because those of us that call for a non-interventionist policy call us isolationists, but yet why aren't we recognizing Cuba, which is 90 miles off our shore? Those are the real isolationists in a society, people who don't want to have any sort of formal economic relations with Cuba, even though they're a communist country. But the point is, we had relationships with the Soviet Union. And of course, Nixon opened up China in 1972 when he went to Beijing, and he toasted Mao Zedong, who allegedly killed 40 million of his fellow citizens in the 1950s and 60s. So again, there's a lot of hypocrisy in Washington regarding international relations, and we just have to call out these people, because they're doing a disservice not only to the American people but to world peace.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Murray, I find it interesting, because didn't anybody among these college administrators realize that when they embrace the COVID narrative, they might actually be committing suicide? I mean, that you would actually do something that would drive students away, or were they just so... I can't believe they didn't see this.
It's the tunnel vision. There's no question about it. I mean, very few people want to go out on the limb and challenge the narrative, because then you're considered a conspiracy theorist, anti-science, the whole nine yards. And this is a sad reality of America today, is that there's no civil discourse about people who disagree on subjects. And so, fortunately, I retired in July of 2020, because you had to get a shot to go back to campus and teach in a mask.
Yeah.
To me, that's the most absurd thing in the world, is to teach in a mask. I mean, first of all, it's unhealthy. We know that, and there's more and more evidence coming out that it's unhealthy. And then you see people running in a mask in their car by themselves in a mask.
Yeah.
It just shows you the sheepish nature of a lot of Americans, that they buy into a narrative that is not based on science, not based on good medicine.
And another thing too is, don't college administrators realize that if they destroy civilization, they're going to destroy themselves too? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't have you can have a civilized society without colleges, but you can't have colleges without a civilized society.
Yep.
I don't. It's rather odd to watch this happen. I mean, and it really makes me ask a lot of questions, just about the nature of the species in general. Was the Enlightenment some kind of great achievement, or was it just a fluke, and we're now going to go back to, and the entire world just going to go back to living like primitive cavemen again?
Well, this is why ideology, ideas, philosophy are so important. I mean, one of the great essays that Rothbard wrote was The Origin of the Welfare State, that I think was published in the mid-90s. And he shows how these ideas were imported from Prussia in the 1880s. And it's just a real eye-opener how these ideas are introduced, get incubated, and then get spread through society over decades and decades and decades. And that was the basis for the New Deal, the Great Society programs, and everything that's followed since then. And I wish everyone would read that essay, because it is just magnificent. It's called The Origins of the Welfare State by Murray Rothbard. And it's available on the Mises.org website.
Yes.
And it's just a great intellectual history, economic history of how this thing evolved. Because you look at America in the early days, it was basically the battle between Hamilton and Jefferson, with centralization versus decentralization. And we should have that debate. Can you have a top-down society? And the answer is no, because it's failed all over the world, whether it's in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, and other countries, now in Argentina. And there's a libertarian presidential candidate that may win the next election in October. That's going to be fascinating to see.
Oh, yeah.
He's basically a hardcore libertarian. His idols are Murray Rothbard and Milton Friedman, even though Friedman was not a hardcore libertarian. So when countries go off the rails, like Argentina has, like Venezuela, you need an intellectual movement to spark change. And we're seeing this around the world. And the United States, you have this also. And now it's just a matter of getting these ideas out to the masses. And that's what I'm trying to do with my Substack column, and with your podcast and other podcasts that I'm on, is to awaken the American people to say, listen, folks, what we have in America is unsustainable. And if you allow the government to dictate to you how to live your life, then what's going to happen? Everything that you do, you will need permission from the government. Now, is that the type of America you want to live in? And that's the question we should be asking and answering.
Yeah, I've recorded 6 shows in 2 weeks about Melee. And I will take any recommendations, anybody I should talk to about Melee. It's huge as far as I'm concerned. It can have a very profound impact on Latin America, but it also raises the question, Murray, and I've asked this question of everybody who's been around long as I have been, or longer. When you saw the Berlin Wall come down, did you think that socialism would be more popular 34 years later?
That is, I think, a great question, because here you have evidence that the Soviet Union and communist East Europe, with basket cases economically, we traveled to Germany in 1992. And I was born in Germany right after World War II in 1946. And my father fought the Nazis in his native Poland, and he was the only one in his family to survive the Holocaust, as was my mother. And when I told him we were going to Germany on a trip, he was ecstatic. He said, "You've got to go to the place where you were born, right outside of Munich." And we were in Munich. We were on a bus trip, but we couldn't get to the place that I was born. And he was just so enthusiastic that we were going to where I grew up, essentially as a toddler. And he didn't have any recrimination about Germany back in 92, or even after World War II. It's something that happened in his life and in my mother's life, and they moved on. But I never heard any bitterness from him. But yet, you would think that people who are, quote, intelligent, like the Bernie Sanders of the world, like the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, like the Gavin Newsoms, like all the others in Congress and the media, what makes an economy peaceful and prosperous?
Yeah.
It's not big government. And it's unfortunate that people take the view that government is the fountain of prosperity. And and without big government, you would have widespread poverty. And this is the greatest myth there is, because we know from the data that the poverty rate from the end of World War II to the Great Society was declining fairly rapidly. And then when the Great Society programs hit, poverty rates flatlined. And with the other thing the Great Society did, and this has been documented, and we're seeing the data, the two-parent family has been demolished in the United States. Not 100%, but 70% of Black children are born in single-parent families, and it's just a horrible situation. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing these mobs in California and other places of youngsters going in without any moral conscience and robbing places of hundreds of thousands of dollars of goods. And the police are not doing anything. The politicians are not terribly concerned, it seems. And yet San Francisco is being decimated. Los Angeles is turning into a war zone. And the concept of thou shalt not steal is gone out the window.
And Murray, this is one reason why I'm very where I'm watching Milei, because those societies have gone socialist, but they still have, they still believe in marriage. They still believe in families. America doesn't anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably easier to get rid of the socialism than it is to get rid of the other problems. I don't know how you get out of the whole, the whole thing with marriage and family declining. I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to think that somebody like Andrew Tate is the solution, but sometimes I wonder if there is, what other solution is there? It's because, I think America and most of Western Europe is pretty much gone on that area. And I don't think it's going to come back,
Yeah. Well, this is the debate we should have about immigration and culture, because there are critics of immigration saying that how does this affect the culture? Because the notion of diversity means that we can all live together, but we know that Yugoslavia is no longer in existence. It's broken up into 6 or 7 different countries, and this is something that the left does not understand. That they have this notion that everybody could live together no matter what their cultural values are. And that's just not true. In fact, my last speech at Ramapo College, or presentation, was in October of 2019, sort of my farewell address. And this is right before COVID. And I said, I don't think in the next 70 years, America is going to survive as a single nation, because I think there are too many centrifugal forces in the country. Because in a small state like New Jersey, which I campaigned for when I ran for governor in '97 and for the U.S. Senate, in the 21st century, even in the small state like New Jersey, there is a big cultural divide between northern New Jersey and northwest New Jersey and South Jersey. And so in a country of 340 million people like the United States, the cultural divide is enormous, not between red and blue, but I think it's basically between, do you want to have a community where you live deciding things, basically the individual and family and the local government, or do you want the federal government to dictate things to you, the individual, the family, and the community? And that's the essence of the discussion.
Yeah, it's the New Jersey. I see it. South Jersey is mostly small towns, except maybe around Philly, and most of northern New Jersey is very urban. New Jersey, I believe New Jersey is still the highest population density of all 50 states, right?
Yep. I mean, especially in northern New Jersey. I mean,
it is crowded in northern New Jersey. You have the people who might still work the farms, and it's very much a divide. I don't know how, and I think the sad thing is, as Doug Casey pointed out, cities are really a symbol of civilization, but they've become the reverse of that, and
Yeah.
and I don't think, and at this point, I don't think Americans really believe. I don't know how you reconcile it, but I think after COVID, there's this large belief among libertarians that a certain portion of the population doesn't care if they live in a slaughterhouse or not.
Well,
Yeah,
New York City and the
yeah,
big cities are turning into third world cities. I mean, I've traveled in
yeah,
the third world. I've seen what it's like in the third world, and I can tell you from traveling in third world cities, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles,
yeah.
San Francisco, they are as bad as some of the third world cities we visited over the years. And this is another example of how ideology affects culture and policy.
Yeah. What do you think anything can be done to save academia? Do you think maybe they'll just wake up and decide, oh, they want to be, they want to be capitalists or what? Because that's really I often wonder if socialism is ever going to die on the college campuses.
That I think is a $64,000 question. I think the jury is out on that. I mean, no one can predict the future with 100% accuracy, but if they keep on raising
Yeah,
prices, they're going to price themselves out of the marketplace, and
yeah,
that's, I think, the bottom line. And I think a lot of male students will realize: do I really want to go to a place where I'm told masculinity is a toxic concept, and that maybe I'm better off becoming an auto technician, make
yeah,
over $100,000 a year, and not have to worry without all the BS that goes on college campuses.
yeah. I think that's something that's really. I won't be surprised if something like that, if that really gets, that's really becoming an issue. And you got, I mean, there's a reason why society has always tried to marry off 20 something males, is because they become more productive. It was yeah, I don't know where that's going. And if they, if you have a lot of young men who don't have a lot of hope with regard to that, and it's, it's definitely, or they get thrown out because they got accused of doing something that they didn't do, or it's, there's a whole lot of problems there. I definitely don't think it's going to get any better. It's and Murray, too, you sound like you're well traveled. If you've never left America, you don't know what poverty looks like.
Oh man, we saw incredible
Yeah,
poverty in Indonesia, in Egypt. Oh my
yeah,
God. I mean, you're
yeah,
talking about people who look like they're in a concentration camp. They're
yeah,
bone thin. They have very little food. They live in mud huts. I mean, it's incredible. So the people who are whining in America about living conditions uh, in the third world, it is horrendous. And
yeah,
uh, in Africa, it's probably even worse because there are so many
yeah,
diseases in Africa that are not being treated effectively. And you've got military coups, you've got tribal animosity, you have all sorts of issues there. But I mean, we saw poverty in China and Indonesia that was
yeah,
it's just stunning to see how
yeah.
people live.
I
And
haven't spent, yeah, for the closest I got to was Peru, but
yeah, we were there also.
I went to Iquitos, which is in the rainforest. So
Mhm.
you know, you love, I don't, sometimes we maybe ought to sit down and talk about maps and stuff, because Iquitos is a 500,000 people, and you either go there by boat or you go there by plane.
Mhm.
You do not. There is no ground transportation there.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, but yeah, that was certainly, you saw the
Oh,
challenges of living in a place like
yeah,
that.
in
Yeah,
Vietnam, we saw some incredible poverty as well.
yeah,
In the Mekong Delta, we met with a family there, and it's just unbelievable. People eat everything that's around them. I mean, literally everything. They cook it and they eat it. I mean, you just don't have all the benefits of living
yeah.
in a prosperous society like the United States or Western Europe.
Yeah, that's one, because of that, that's one thing I got from my Catholic school upbringing is, it's a sin to throw food away,
Oh yeah,
because a lot of these people, they see you throw food away, they're like, you're throwing food away, like,
yeah.
you know, because we just live in so much abundance, it's really, really shocking, it's I don't think Americans appreciate. Yeah, I don't know where we go from here too. I
Well,
think I do think sometimes things like the Free State Project or things like that work out, and I don't. It's really hard to say where the world's going, but it's nice to see melee, and maybe South America will be where it's at.
Well, I think this is why Tom Woods' project is kind of fascinating about how to really withdraw from what's going on, because we're bombarded
Yeah.
24/7 with political news. And I've spoken to a lot of people. They don't even turn on the news anymore. It's interesting. Tucker Carlson says that he doesn't own a TV, yet he became very famous through TV, cable TV, which I think is quite ironic, to say the least. And people are just, they don't read the newspaper anymore because it's just constant constant bombardment about politics. And the thing is, I like to see shows about, one of my favorite shows is How It's Made, about how companies produce products that we all use in our daily lives. To me, entrepreneurship is the essence of civilization, because it shows us how people get products and services to the masses. And that's really what an economy is all about. How do you satisfy the needs of the masses? So a theme in Mises' work is that the masses determine what's being produced. Even large corporations can't put their products into the marketplace and expect miracles. Again, a letter in the Wall Street Journal today about a company that was making dog food, and the sales were not so good, and they've got all the people together in a room, and the letter writer says they're trying to figure out why people don't like why the dogs. They can't sell more of the dog food, and somebody raises their hand and says, well, it's because the dogs don't like it. So that's the answer. I mean, if you have a product and it's not well received in the marketplace, get rid of the product. And and instead, when it comes to government, we seem to throw more money at the product or the service or the program, as opposed to getting rid of it.
Yeah, that seems to be you just throw more money at it. It doesn't make any sense, and that's part of what made them, I think has made America what it is, whether it be Benjamin Franklin flying his kite, or Nikola Tesla and the electric motor, or Edison and the phonograph, or we've had so many people do so many things, and a lot of them we don't even know who they are, but they've made these little changes. But that's how you do advances. You build better things. You learn from past mistakes. It kind of worries me too, because I wonder if we're losing that, with our technological advances and things like that. I don't know where we're going with that, but I still do see some advancements,
Well, the wonderful thing about what we're doing right now is that we couldn't have done this, 20, 30 years ago. And here we are. We can reach millions of people around the world for virtually no cost. I mean, that was unheard of years ago. And so this is one of the benefits of technology, is that we can communicate a lot easier. It's a seamless communication with our cell phone, with our laptops. And that's why we can spread ideas much more easily today than in the past. So that's the really good news. The bad news is that the government is trying to interfere with that, with what they did with Twitter and Facebook during the 2020 election, how they're monitoring our telephone calls and all that. So again, government always uses technology for its own interest, as opposed to just letting technology be for the benefit of the public.
Yeah, that's where it's going. Speaking of technology, what do you think about Bitcoin?
I haven't done a deep dive in it, but to me, it violates a basic principle of Austrian economics, is that it has to be organic through the marketplace, and it has to be generally accepted by people. And that's what makes money. It's generally accepted by buyers and sellers. Right now, that's not happening. It's basically a form of speculation at this point. Now, whether it becomes a viable current money, where people are transacting it for daily transactions and using it to pay their bills and things like that, it'll still be a speculation. I mean, Warren Buffett has been very critical of it, and he's a pretty smart guy. And to me, I'm a big fan of hard money. I think paper money is something we discussed in my financial history class. Paper is not money. It's a claim to real money, whether gold or silver. And just let the marketplace and determine what money should be, as opposed to the government dictating it. And if we're going to have quote government money, Federal Reserve notes, they should be backed by gold, which they once were, but not 100%. as Rothbard argues in the case for 100% gold dollar.
Well, it raises the question for me, and I think it's a question a lot of people ask is, can you have a gold standard or a precious metal standard and have a democracy at all?
Well, the thing is, the gold standard prevents government from inflating and
Yes.
running into deficits. And in Argentina, they have an unlimited printing press, and that's why they have these deficits and 100% inflation.
Yeah.
The gold standard was supposed to be a constraint on the bankers and on the politicians, but through a series of events, which we can see from FDR calling in the gold in 1933, from Nixon severing the last link between dollar and gold in 1971, we've had constant inflation. And it's probably going to get a lot worse, Chris, based upon my research, because these deficits are not going away because spending is not going down. It's only going up at different rates of speed. And we will have a day of reckoning. And I think that day of reckoning is coming at the end of this decade.
Quite possibly, yeah. I don't know, and we don't really know of any example in history of democracy fixing this problem. That's
yeah.
There's when Jefferson said history only shows us what bad government is. I mean, we don't really have. I don't know if we've really learned from that either. And I don't really know how we got down this path. I do know to a certain extent how we got down this path, but it's still kind of mind boggles me that it happened at all. Because
well, what we've had is crony capitalism plus Marxism plus fascism. That's where we are today.
Yeah,
we have everything. The perfect storm is the crony capitalism has been around from the beginning of the Republic. Then we have Marxist ideology from the mid-19th century, and then fascism from the 20th century, and now it's all coming together in the 21st century. That's my broad overview, panoramic view of what's happened to America.
And I think that's one of the big problems is that so many of the people who claim to be defenders of capitalism really are crony capitalists.
Yeah.
They don't, and that just discredits the. I mean, if you look at a lot of what I would call economic injustices out there, you can find corporate welfare at the root of a whole lot of them.
Oh yeah.
It's in one form or another. And it seems like to me there was. Sometimes I wonder if maybe sometimes I wonder if maybe just the capitalists or they said, well, we've been trying to fight this crony capitalism with capitalism and it doesn't work, so we'll try fighting it with socialism instead.
Yeah.
It's almost like they accepted it, or at least we can. I don't really, but I also think in a lot of ways socialism really is a conservative thing more than it is a thing on the left, But it's also telling, too, that you can't be a college professor and be a Nazi and say nice things about Hitler, but you can be a college professor and say nice things about Stalin.
Well, that's just fascinating. I'm give you one example. I was teaching, I forgot which course it was. It may have been corporate finance or my banking course years ago. And somehow we got onto the subject of socialism. And one of the students said, one of his professors at Ramapo College said how wonderful socialism is. And he got up, he raised his hand and said, listen, I lived under a socialist economy and it's awful. And he challenged the professor about her views about how good socialism is. And it just shows you people who have direct experience with living under socialist economies are probably the best advocates for free enterprise, as opposed to native-born Americans who think that somehow socialism is going to provide free healthcare and education and opportunity and all that. No, it's the marketplace. It's a meritocracy, and college professors should know that better than anybody else, because in order to teach at the college, you either need a PhD or an EDD or a JD degree in order to teach there, and they don't give that out like candy, people think you can do that in a socialist economy.
Yeah, it's really sometimes I wonder if maybe there was this realization that maybe the socialists realized that if it reminds me of this quote from Carl Sagan. In science, it often happens that scientists say, that's a really good argument. My position is mistaken. And then they would actually change their minds, and you never hear that old view from them again. They really do it. It doesn't happen as often as it should because scientists are human and change is sometimes painful, but it happens every day. I cannot recall the last time something like that happened in politics or religion.
Yeah. People have a vested interest. If you spend 40 years promoting an idea and then people challenge it, it's very rare that people say, I made a mistake. However, you got to give some people credit. When the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union imploded, Robert Heilbronner, the socialist economist at the New School in New York City, said Mises was right. Socialism doesn't work. So, people should have known that, because in 1922, 23, his book on socialism was published, pointing out how socialism was unsustainable. And economists should have embraced that and said, we do not support any socialist programs. And I can go down the whole list of all the socialist programs that are out there. And Mises devastated that in a very comprehensive way. And it's just one of the greatest books of Western civilization.
And Murray, sometimes I wonder if there's something about the nature of debate. I mean, if you put, let's say you get two people who, who want to, debate something. And let's say you want to debate whether or not, pineapple should go on pizza or not. And you lock these two people in a room for 6 hours. And, 90% of the time, those people will walk out of that room feeling more convinced that their position is correct, even though they might have argued for 6 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd love to know why that happens. I think that's something that really, it does happen that one side might change his mind, but it more often than not, you get two people debating something, they just end up being more convinced that they're correct.
Well, I think this has a lot to do with ego, because people don't like to admit they were incorrect. Or let me give you a perfect example of this. I was diagnosed with a duodenal ulcer when I was in college, and the treatment back then was you took and the thought was that ulcers were caused by stress, and so you would get Valium, a low dosage Valium, and Maalox as antacid. And then I was diagnosed again in the 1970s. And so years later, an Australian gastroenterologist had a hypothesis that ulcers are not caused by stress, but they're caused by the H. pylori bacteria. And his fellow gastroenterologists basically discounted him and ridiculed him for his thesis. So he injected himself with H. pylori bacteria, got an ulcer, and was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine. So the whole medical profession was wrong for decades, because they asserted that ulcers are caused by stress instead of the H. pylori bacteria. And so people have been treated for ulcers using antibiotics to kill the H. pylori bacteria. So again, science progresses. It's not when someone says the science is settled, they don't know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to the climate, which is a whole nother topic. And I would urge your listeners to go to the CO2coalition.org for the best information about climate and how CO2 is not a problem. It is one of the greatest things we have, because plants need CO2. And if we reduce CO2, Chris, the planet will die.
Exactly. Yes. And, there's a lot of stuff out there that I think COVID probably exposed to the general public just how corrupted intellectual life is in America. I hope we can fix it, but I don't know if it's ever going to recover.
Yeah. All right, Chris, it's great to be with you today. I wish we could continue this.
Yeah.
Anytime, just give me a holler. We'll do it again.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say before we go?
Well, just people can go to my Substack, murraysabrin.substack.com, and read my commentary on economics and politics, and pick up my memoir on Amazon, From Immigrant to Public Intellectual, An American Story, which is my journey from coming to America as a toddler of Holocaust survivors and learning about America in the 1950s and 60s, and becoming a libertarian in the 70s, running for office as a libertarian and a Republican since 1997, and why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, which is basically try to educate as many people as possible as to the alternative to the welfare warfare state, which has governed America for over 100 years.
Also, if you ever get back to Munich, there's this little exhibit that honors the White Rose. You got to see that. It only takes like an hour, but it's definitely worth it.
Terrific.
And of course, you can still go to the place where they got arrested. But yes, okay. Please like, subscribe, follow the channel, give the video a thumbs up. I have a Substack, fountainheadforum.substack.com. My novel is Escape from the Village. This is Chris Baker. Thank you, Murray Sabrin, and we are out.